The Java language includes a number of syntax styles that allow you to loop through the contents of arrays and other types of data collections. I'll demonstrate 4 approaches to looping in this project named loops. The main class in this project has a set of code that's commented out currently. It declares a static variable, an array of strings called months. I'm going to loop through this data and output these strings a number of times, using a different syntax style each time. I'll start by uncommenting this code. I'll select the commented code and then press Ctrl/ on Windows or Command/ on Mac, and that removes the / comments at the beginnings of the lines. Then I'll place the cursor inside the main method. The first type of loop I'll show you uses a numeric counter variable. It's a conventional for loop, and the syntax looks exactly the same as it would in JavaScript and other similar languages. I'll start by typing in the word for, and then pressing Ctrl-. Eclipse gives me a number of choices, and I'll choose the first one, for iterate over array. This sort of loop uses a temporary variable, sometimes called a counter variable. When you generate the code using Eclipse, it will name the variable I for integer, and it will data type it as an int. Now, if you're dealing with a fairly small amount of data, you could change the data type to a short or even a byte, but typically ints are used in this case. When you're looping through an array, you should set the initial value of the counter variable I as 0. This is because, in Java, arrays are zero-based. The first item is item 0, the second is item 1, and so on. Then, in order to make sure that you hit every item in the array, you add a comparison. You look at the counter variable I, and you compare it to the length of the array. As long as I is less than the length, you'll execute any code within the for loop. But when I matches or exceeds the length, you'll stop. And again, that's because of the zero-based array. Say you have an array of 10 items. If the length is 10 and I starts at 0, then you can keep executing code as long as I is less than 10. When it actually is 10, it's exceeded the available items in the array. The third part of the for construct is the increment. Most commonly, you'll see this, I++, meaning increment the value by 1. But you can put in any operation you want here. You could use I minus minus, you could say I plus equals 5, and then you'd be stepping by 5, and so on. So now, I'll place the cursor inside the for loop, and put in system.out.println, and I'm ready to output something. Now, when Eclipse generated the code, it thought I might want to output the values from args, but instead, I'm going to output the values from months, and that's the array that I declared at the top. And in the println command, I'll output months, open bracket, I, close bracket. And now I'm going to be outputting the string at that position of the array. I'll save and run the code, and there's the result. Now, to make this a little bit easier to see, I'm going to detach the console, right-click and choose Detached, move it up onto the screen and expand it, and now I'll have a lot more room to see the output from my application. So that's a for loop with a counter variable. Here's another approach to using a for loop. This is called a for each, but unlike some C-style languages, you don't actually use the word each. Here's how it actually looks. Once again, I'll type in the word for and press Ctrl-, and I'll choose for each from the list of choices. And here's how Eclipse models it. Within the for loop, it declares a variable, by default of type string, and it gives it a name. I'm going to change the name from string to month. And then it asks what array or collection you want to loop through. I'm going to be looping through months. So in English, this would be read as, for each month in the months array. But you declare it in Java using a data type variable before the colon, and the array or collection you're looping through after the colon. Now, I can refer directly to the variable month. So I'm going to go make a copy of this code, system.out.println. I'll paste it in, but now I don't need to refer to the collection anymore. I'm already doing the iteration. I'll just refer to the variable that's created temporarily each time through the loop. I'll go up to my original for loop and comment it out, and I'll save and run the application, and once again, there's my output. In most cases with arrays, you can use either of these two approaches. The only real advantage to using the counter variable as opposed to the for each syntax is that you're creating new counter variables rather than complex objects. Whereas with the for each, particularly with strings and other complex objects, you're creating a new object on each time through the loop. In most environments, it really won't matter. and you should use the syntax that you're most comfortable with. I'll comment this version out, and now we'll move to the while loop. There are two forms of the while loop: the while loop where you put the condition at the front, and the while loop where you put the condition at the back. Before you create a while loop, you should declare a variable and give it an initial value. Unlike the for construct, the while construct does not do the variable tracking for you. So I'll create a variable called counter and set it to a value of 0. Now I'll type in the word while, and I'll press Control space, and I'll choose while loop with condition. The while loop with condition takes a look at a Boolean expression and asks, should I keep on looping? I'm going to set my condition as counter less than months.length. And then I'll move the cursor into the while loop, I'll paste in that code, and I'll change the name of the variable I'm looking at from I to counter, because that's what I declared it as earlier. But again, the while loop isn't going to increment that value for me. I have to do it myself. So I'll place the cursor after the print line command and increment the value with counter ++. I'll save and run the code. And once again, it does exactly the same thing as the for loops, but with a slightly different syntax. Finally, there's the do while loop. For the do while loop, you place the condition at the end of the loop. I'm going to make a copy of this code, and I'll paste it down at the bottom. I'll comment out the original, and now let's create a do loop. I'll take this while command, and I'll move it after the code block. Then I'll place the cursor at the beginning of the code block and put in the word do, and after the while command, I'll finish with a semicolon. So now I'm saying start by outputting the value, and then increment the value, and then do the evaluation, rather than doing the evaluation at the beginning. Take a look at what happens. It still works exactly the same. So these are the 4 possible syntax styles that you can use for looping through arrays and other collections. You can use counter for loops, you can use for each syntax, you can use a simple while loop, or you can use a do while loop. In many cases, it's just a matter of programmer preference, which syntax you like or are most comfortable with. You will find that there are differences in what problems you can solve between, say, a while and a do while, but for the most part, it's your choice.